Going through and further along, you've got Section 5 that creates this crime of giving false documents for work. And I just want to point out, it's a felony with a $250,000 fine and a 15-year sentence. The senator from the 45th who cares so much about trafficking in minors might want to note that paying for sex with a 16-year-old only carries with it a 5-year penalty, yet giving false papers to get a job is going to get you, and mind you, that might be a 15-year-old trying to get a job at the Del Taco because he or she wants to go to work without, not because they're not a citizen, but because they can't get the work permit from their school, but they need to work or they want to work. They're guilty of a felony with a 15-year sentence. 15-year sentence, that's Section 5 on page 8 of the bill. And paying for sex with teenagers carries only a 5-year penalty. Now, the next thing, because we've been dealing a lot with this, well, what happens to the church bus? And so the supposed solution that folks have come up with to this that keeps coming back and forth is this transporting someone if you are lawfully hired, a term that's not defined anywhere in the code, go find it, it's not, and it's not defined in this bill, and a privately funded social service, which basically means that if someone's getting a bus ride to the church or from the church, this is not the church's 501c3 that's doing English as a second language classes or mom's morning out or doing some kind of work. This means people going to and from church. If that church bus transporting those folks is pulled over, everybody on board and the bus driver and the church are liable, because privately funded social service is not defined in the bill, it's not defined in the code, and if it's in fact a 501c3, not every church has one of those, not every church is engaging in privately funded social services. So I just want to point that out. The last thing I want to point out is this Section 20, this big long thing of creating this commission for Immigration Enforcement Review Board. I brought this up last time on questioning the senator from the 10th, because we have this issue of, for the first time I've ever seen it in the code, you have to be a registered voter to make a complaint. Not only does that probably bring the Voting Rights Act into question here, that is also an unconstitutional provision, and that's on page 24, about lines 820, let's see, 827, 28, 29. Again, you're basically eliminating a person's constitutional right to a redress of grievances. It's another, just because they have chosen not to register to vote, a voluntary act. Again, another unconstitutional provision, and I'm not sure of anywhere where we've gone out and created these type of independent enforcement review boards, what this creature is, or whether it's even constitutional, or whether in fact it's more of a usurpation of the Attorney General's constitutional powers and the executive branch's constitutional powers. It's this independent board that that does not appear to be constitutional, and someone should have taken a look at that, and someone should have probably taken that out of the bill. But we won't get that done because no one felt that they needed to have a conference committee on a bill that was drafted on the fly in the last days of the session. And then I just want to point out at what slippery slope we are on. And I know that the senator from the 45th is off the floor, but I am going to comment on the senator from the 45th speech, because I'm going to point out something. The senator from the 45th, this is the dangerous precipice we're on with regards to racial profiling and really getting into the police state. The senator from the 45th, who I've known her for years, and I understand she stood here in the well talking about having been a Jewish mayor. if she's sitting up there basically racial profiling in her speech on the floor by commenting that, well, there used to not be only English spoken in my schools, but now there's one school with 100 languages, and that's a reason for having a bill about immigration, because, well, there's 100 languages spoken, they must all be illegal. I mean, that's the general assumption that's to be made from that speech. Or because now that she drives down the road, there are fewer foreigners, and that was her words in this well, just before I left, that somehow that means there are fewer illegals because the folks from Bulgaria and Serbia and other places that are in my district on overstayed visas, and I know they are, they look like me. But because there are fewer people that don't look like her or don't look like me, that's the very kind of racial profiling. We just saw that happen here on the floor of the House by an incredibly well-meaning, compassionate senator. As she pointed out, supposedly the most compassionate person here seems to think that we're not going to have racial profiling when it's being done in the very well of this House just 2 speakers before I spoke. That's what this bill is encouraging. It's encouraging constituents to do that. It will be encouraging law enforcement to do that. If you think that, quote unquote, by seeing fewer people that don't look like you on the street is a way to prove that a bill is running off undocumented, illegal, unlawfully present, whatever word euphemism you want to use for it, if that's your justification if that's your litmus test for whether the bill's working or not, that's racial profiling, point blank. And that is what we were supposedly trying to avoid, and this is a patent example of why this should be in a conference committee, folks. We can do that. No one here has to go home and say they have not voted for something. Everybody's gotten their yes votes or their no votes. But we can disagree. We can vote down Amendments 1B and 1A and whatever other amendments are on here, vote this down so that we can get to a point where we can insist. We can get this into a conference committee and we can strip out these provisions that are just going to get us in court, just going to lead to the very kinds of racial profiling that we're supposedly at least saying in the bill that we can't do. And we can get this done right. And we can get it done before any of us will have a primary opponent. We can get it done before any of us will have a single person write a $400 check to qualify against us, if we can just stand another couple of hours of nasty emails. But to sit and say and quote pseudoscience and say, well, they're costing us money when there's no legitimate source saying exactly how much money is being cost and netting it out, and that we can't do that, citing the same urban myths that have basically got us to this point, stoking those fears of hate that have gotten people thinking that we have to do something. Well, this is not the thing to do. Stoking those fires even further is not the thing to do, and we need to vote this down. We need to get this into a conference committee. Remember, voting it down is not a vote against final passage. For those of you who feel you've got to vote for something, it's a vote to get this into a conference committee so that these 24, 25, 26 odd changes can be looked at, so that we can actually have real live input from the real live business community, whether it's the agricultural community or the Metro Chamber or the Georgia Chamber, as to how to deal with this. And then if what you want is to make sure, the only other issue I would say is if you really want to deal with the issues that were brought up by the senator of the 45th, we actually ought to be putting money in the budget for more counties to adopt 287G, if that's really what y'all want to do, because that was effective. Whether you like it or not, it was effective. This is not that. And saying that 287G worked in my county, so let's go do something else that is unconstitutional, going to cost jobs, going to cause boycotts, is not that's saying, well, because X is happening, because X worked, I want to do A. That doesn't make any sense. We should send this to a conference committee, and unless there are questions, I'll yield the well.